Welcome to Acadicus, and thank you for joining me, Dr. Eric B. Bauman, as we talk about the simulation to practice pathway and Bauman's layered learning model. These are two different models that I've come up with over the last 10 to 15 years to support simulation and technology-based education, particularly within the healthcare and medical education paradigm. So follow me into this great Acadicus space where we talk about these two important learning models. So you can see on the big boards here, we have the simulation to practice pathway and the layered learning model. Let's start with the simulation to practice pathway. This has actually gone through a number of iterations from all the way going back to 2007, 2010, 12, and 2019 as the technology has continued to progress as it relates to simulation. Remember, simulation is actually a technique. It's not the training itself. So it's very important to have some sort of theory or framework to help you work through designing curricula and experiences utilizing or leveraging different types of simulation. So one of the most important things to remember is that simulation as a technique still requires students to have some sort of didactic preparation or knowledge acquisition. So when we think about knowledge acquisition, it is traditionally how students get prepared to come to the lab or how students get prepared to come to the supervised clinical environment. Traditionally, this would have taken place through lecture or through reading assignments, problem-based learning, small group discussions. So in the technology-enhanced world, particularly when it comes to clinical education, I now believe that the knowledge acquisition takes place through a combination of behavioral and didactic experiences. And these experiences need not be simply a reading assignment, but I think that games, digital applications, including AR and VR, are going to be part of that paradigm. So just like a student would purchase a textbook, read chapters 1 through 3 in order to prepare for a simulation lab experience or a clinical experience on a unit, they will now undoubtedly have that reading assignment, but they may be assigned to a game or an application or a virtual reality experience as part of that didactic preparation. And one of the interesting things is that students will often go out and find these experiences whether or not you assign that experience to them or not. What do I mean by that? Well, oftentimes students have come to me and saying, hey, have you seen that great iPad application on congestive heart failure or lung sounds or heart tones? And that's something that simply didn't happen 25 or 30 years ago. So you should be prepared for students to be bringing these applications as part of their didactic preparation to you, right? So it's here. Students are going to leverage games, digital experiences, and applications to better prepare them for their learning curve, if you will. So once we've had that knowledge acquisition, then there's going to be some sort of simulation experience. And this is likely taking place in a bricks and mortar institution right now in the simulation laboratory, if you will. And that often involves some sort of mannequin or task trainer, oftentimes standardized patients, but now is beginning to include digital experiences too, just like this experience you're having with me in a digital immersive environment. The idea is that that simulation experience will then better prepare people for clinical practice. And I don't mean independent clinical practice at this juncture. I mean the supervised clinical practice. In nursing education, that would be your clinicals. In medical education is often known as your clerkships. In the the realm of emergency medical services or paramedic education, this is your ride time or your ride along time in the back of the ambulance with a mentor, with a clinical preceptor, if you will. Now, here's the really cool thing. If those digital experiences, right, whether they're games or applications or a virtual reality experience you had as part of the knowledge acquisition step, were done very well, if they were good designed experiences, a nod to Professor Kurt Squire, one of my mentors at UC Irvine, if those digital experiences, if those games, applications were designed well with specific outcomes in mind, then they really become cognitive aids. They become cognitive aids in the same way that, say, the American Heart Association Advanced Cardiac Life Support guide that we all, in my time, had stuffed in our lab coats or the back pockets of our duty pants or turnout gear. Those cognitive aids are very powerful. They're now available digitally as a game, as an application, as a virtual reality experience. So in this way, the use of digitally enhanced learning becomes part of that lifelong learning tool, right, that drives not only the primary education or pre-licensure education, but drives professional development across the lifespan of a career. So while we've just talked about the simulation to practice pathway, we're just going to look over to my right now, and we see Bauman's layered learning model. Now, there are certainly some similarities between the two. That knowledge acquisition piece is very much related to didactic preparation. So in the layered learning model, which is specifically designed to support learning in the digital age, the didactic preparation still takes place. Now, it might not take place by reading a textbook, hold it in your hand, haptic textbook. It likely does not involve printing an NIH article, onto pieces of paper and reading it, but it might be opening up a PDF and reading that on your tablet or reading that on your computer screen or reading it on your smartphone. Now, here's the interesting part. That didactic preparation may be digitally available, but I'm not really advocating that you open up a PDF in this immersive environment and read the PDF floating in the sky, right? You should leverage digitally enhanced learning in the most available and most efficient way. And that might be reading that manuscript or reading that textbook chapter on the bus on your way to your small group discussion. That the next overlapping part of this diagram is the interactive application. Now, this existed in the simulation to practice pathway too. And so you've got some sort of didactic preparation, whether it took place in a small group discussion, in a classroom, reading a manuscript or an article or a textbook. Now we have this interactive application, and this is overlapping with and is complementary to your didactic preparation. Now, here's the key. That interactive application, that digital experience, better prepares you for that face-to-face, often bricks and mortars, haptic model or haptic simulation. What do I mean by haptic simulation or haptic model? What I mean by that is the very intimate, hands-on experience of working with others in a lab with a shared experience. Now, I'm not saying that that can't happen in virtual reality, because here you are sharing an experience with me in virtual reality. But virtual reality hasn't really gotten to the point where we can share the experience of doing a cardiac resuscitation that involves the actual feel of doing CPR, what it feels like to use a laryngoscope and lift the soft tissue of the oral pharynx and guiding an endotracheal tube into the soft tissue through the vocal cords and ventilating that patient. Maybe 5 years from now, but not today. So that digital experience then better prepares me for that face-to-face intimate experience where there's a very real touch, a high touch experience. Now, if we've done a good job with the preparation, the interactive digital application, then the coveted time in the bricks and mortar laboratory with your mentors, with your faculty, and with your peers, that will better prepare us for a real world experience. Now, again, just like in the simulation to practice pathway, I'm not advocating that we send you right out of the virtual reality experience and the bricks and mortar simulation experience into the real world to practice on your own. No, I'm advocating you are now exponentially better prepared for that coveted clerkship or precepted clinical experience because you've had all these overlapping and interacting facets of your learning curve. So we're going to come up here, and I want to show you this. This is really exciting because now we're going to walk right into the model. So here I am standing in the didactic preparation. And we've developed this model in virtual reality to demonstrate that this is not a static experience. It's not necessarily a linear experience moving from left to right, but these are overlapping experiences. And so the first part of this diagram is here we are, the lecture. Undoubtedly, this professor or lecturer or teacher has asked the students to do some sort of reading experience, or maybe do an interactive online digital experience, or a handheld experience, or even a virtual reality experience that will now be reinforced in the classroom or through didactic preparation. All right, then we're going to move up one more level here, and here we are in the interactive application, or in this case, a digital application. So on the board in front of me here, this is actually a virtual reality airway training module that we created. Now, here's the interesting thing. This experience could take place on its own, but if I were the professor, I would have probably had a reading assignment that said, hey, after you complete this reading assignment, go into this virtual reality airway trainer and work through the 6 lessons that are in there that include the bag valve mask, the oral and nasal pharyngeal airways, the King airway tube, and finally the most complex and most invasive, the endotracheal tube, right? And because I've asked you to use different types of didactic preparation, I think that this interactive application is going to be even more powerful if you just happened across it on your own without any additional preparation, right? So here, if we come over here and we kind of look over, this is part of the simulation to practice pathway, but it's also part of the layered learning model. We've had our knowledge acquisition. Now we're in a simulation-based learning experience. This happens to be virtual reality. But as your preceptor, I want to know, can you actually do this in a hands-on environment? Can you actually insert the endotracheal tube using a laryngoscope without causing harm to the patient, without lacerating the patient's tongue, without knocking out the patient's teeth? So now I want to go one step farther, and I want to provide you with that high-touch haptic experience. So now I'm up here. I'm almost to the top of the world. I'm not quite to the top of the world, but you can see now we're at the haptic model, the task trainer, the mannequin, the etc. And so here, that's actually a picture of me using a King-style airway tube, which I've inserted to ventilate a mannequin. It's a very hands-on process. And I did this actually when I was teaching the programmers what it looked like to use these devices when we were building the virtual reality airway trainer, right? So that you have to eventually get to the point where you can pick up the device and insert it properly and use proper technique. Again, the didactic preparation, the interactive digital application. Now we're back in the real world in a bricks and mortar situation where we're going to do the hands-on, very intimate learning experience. Again, this is all part of what Professor Squire would call the designed experience, right? And the designed experience is leading students along a pathway where that through the experiences we provide for them, we are very confident in what those outcomes will be, driving the student to a specific outcome. Well, the eventual outcome isn't to get people to be able to ventilate a mannequin, right? Some people get very good at ventilating mannequins, but we've got to get one level higher. So I'm going to turn around and I'm going to come up here. Now I'm at the top of the world. Let me get over here so we can better see everything together. And now I'm standing on the real world experience, right? So the didactic preparation, the interactive application, the haptic model, the real world experience. It's following the simulation to practice pathway. The simulation practice pathway is very much related to the more contemporary layered learning experience. The layered learning experience is the template for you to provide an experience which leverages digital technology, but yet still prepares the clinical learner for real world experience. The goal of all of this isn't to get people to be able to provide healthcare only in a digital experience, but to take care of real human beings, the human experience. I'm just going to back up here a little bit and take a look. So in front of me now, we have somebody who's actually using a bag valve mask to ventilate a patient. Very high touch, very high stakes. And so if you're doing this for the first time in the back of an ambulance with a senior paramedic, or more likely in the operating room with an anesthesiologist or a nurse anesthetist standing right over you, they're saying, okay, we've anesthetized this patient, we've paralyzed this patient, go ahead and use that bag valve mask and show me that you know how to appropriately ventilate this patient so that you're appropriately oxygenating this patient. And if I fail as the student, the stakes are low because my preceptor, the expert clinician, is right there to take over for me. But we believe that because we have prepared people through knowledge acquisition, didactic preparation, then we've provided a simulation experience for them, and then we've brought them back to a hands-on model, that they're much more likely to succeed when it comes to the high stakes learning and eventual independent clinical practice. I want to thank you all for joining me today as we learned about the simulation to practice pathway and my layered learning model. Thank you very much. If you have more questions or you want to learn more about my work and my scholarship, please feel free to visit my website at clinicalplayground.com.